Are you troubled by strange noises in the night?
Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic?
Have you or any of your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost?
If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up the phone and I'm sorry, we'll do it again.
Go, keep going.
Just blasters?
Blasters. Are you troubled by strange noises in the night?
Do you experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic?
Have you or any of your family ever seen a spook, specter, or ghost?
If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute. Pick up your phone and call the professionals.
Ghost Blasters!
Hello, and welcome to Why Do We Like? I'm your host, Grant Lees, a comedy writer, development executive, and big nerd. And today, we'll be diving deep into one of the all-time great comedies, a film that broke records for its budget and its box office, a feature unafraid to cross the streams of comedy, horror, sketch, and screenwriting, the spookily hilarious Ghostbusters.
Who you gonna call?
Released on June 8th, 1984, literally 1984, on the exact same day as another to-be iconic horror-ish comedy film, Gremlins, Ghostbusters started the special effects-driven comedy boom, and proved to be yet another high point on the star-rising journey of its comedic creators and cast, one that beamed itself straight from the silver screen into pop culture history, locking itself firmly in the vault of our cultural consciousness as if waiting to be unleashed by a sniveling rep from the EPA. And man, I love this movie. And so do you. Probably. I mean, if you're here, you almost certainly do. Why would you watch this if you hate Ghostbusters? But maybe you don't, and you're just wanting to see what the hype is all about. If so, hello, welcome, and buckle up, Chucklefuck. The first time watching this film is unforgettable. For me, a lad 8 years unborn at the time of its release, that first watch came circa 2003, in the basement of a friend who, for soon-to-be obvious reasons, shall remain nameless, while we took turns playing Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, one of the greatest games of all time, don't at me, stuck on, in one of life's great synchronicities, the Knuckles Emerald Hunt level that culminated in a boss fight with a massive ghost, fittingly named King Boom Boo, whose war cry of "Frou Frou" still echoes in my head to this day. But that was 20 years ago, yet still 20 years after the original release of this film. And in those 2 decades, much has happened, and much hasn't happened. I have not picked up Sonic Adventure 2 Battle again, despite it being one of the GOATs. I have not spoken to this childhood friend, and I have also not seen Ghostbusters.
Is this true?
Which, in the comedy business, can almost be considered a crime.
I want to make a phone call.
But now, on the eve of its yet latest franchise sequel, I figured, what the hey, why not check back in with our old pals Venkman, Spengler, Stantz, and Zedmore? And boy was I happy that I did. This movie is, in no uncertain terms, elite, an all-time comedy, engaging hilarity from titles to credits, and honestly, I barely remembered a lick of it.
Boy, the superintendent's gonna be pissed.
I realized that, perhaps in an 11-yearly-old furor, watching this film for the first time out of the corner of my eye, with the rest of my eye and brain space dedicated to the surly King Boom Boo, I had not given the film its proper shrift. Dare I say, I gave it short shrift. But now, years later, as a wizened comedy fan, a developed comedy development executive, and a YouTube deep dive channel proprietologist, it felt that this film was due for an analysis. Why do we like Ghostbusters? Today, I'm here to answer that question. Okay, why fuck around? This is a long video, don't look at the runtime, or I'll get needlessly granular on the finer points of every element of Ghostbusters. But you don't need a PhD in parapsychology to understand the broad strokes. Why do we like Ghostbusters? At its core, despite its effects, it is simplicity done right. It charts a simple narrative course, brings us along for the ride with its simple but hilarious characters, then makes it all pop with a third act that is simple in concept but grandiose in scale. It's a film crafted by comedy talents who are in the prime of their careers, comedy greats who are still building their legacy of greatness. The writing is bang on perfect. Bill Murray gives one of the most quotable, hilarious performances in modern comedy.
Is this true? Yes, it's true.
The special effects made it feel special, at the time and in hindsight in our current era of CGI, and those effects immerse us by being so charmingly tangible, so real, even if we know there aren't actual ghosts, man. But just what the fuck does all that mean? It's a lot of fluffy yum-yum words, but it's also pretty vague and highly unsubstantiated. How did it do all these great things? That's what the rest of this video is here to unpack. Coming up, we'll get into all of the nitty-gritty ectoplasmic proton-packed details, but one thing I'll highlight in particular was how clearly the principles of sketch writing, brought to the fore by writers Aykroyd and Ramis' pedigree in the worlds of SNL and SCTV respectively, course through the ghostly DNA of this film. That's not something you're really supposed to be able to pull off in a film. You generally don't want any non-sketch project you've written to be described by an executive as
sketchy.
But the deft creative hands behind this film managed to pull it all off with aplomb. And in a world full of ghosts, that may be their biggest magic trick. So yeah, I'll talk about that, I'll talk about the development, I'll talk about other great comedy writing tricks that the film and script pull, as well as show off some of the surprising differences between the shooting script and the final product. Talk a little bit about the cast, about the performances, about the filmmaking, about the music, about the film's legacy, then end as I always do with a verbose and elegiac summation / gush of all of those things over this music. Okay, enough yammering, let's do this thing. The Ghostbusters that we know and love today was not always the Ghostbusters that was on the page. The concept had been long gestating in the mind of its chief envisioneer, Dan Aykroyd, but the first draft of the projects were, frankly, pretty gonzo. Generally inspired by Aykroyd's obsession with spirituality, something that had run in his family since his grandfather, a telephone engineer, tried to find a way to contact the dead via radio technology, the initial iteration of the Ghostbusters were to be something akin to interdimensional Power Rangers skirting across the multiverse to stop paranormal threats. In this version, Aykroyd would be paired up with his real-life chum John Belushi, whose unfortunate passing in 1982 forced Aykroyd to reevaluate the script and the project. Now, without one of its chief inspirations, and with the acknowledgement that that kind of realm-hopping adventure would require a budget that he could never secure, Harold Ramis was brought in to do a rewrite, grounding the film in a more realistic setting and bringing it to the far more achievably shootable hellscape that was mid-80s New York City. It was here that many of the now beloved elements of the film began to coalesce. As noted in the film's commentary, Ramis saw part of the unique spin on this film being less of any kind of heroic thing and more of a business venture, a people going into business film. This was the 80s after all, an era that would eventually spawn capitalist metonym Gordon Gekko, and everybody was going into business.
Everybody has 3 mortgages nowadays.
To me, as I'll explore more, this is one of the most critical elements of the film's success, this blue-collar, workman-like sensibility. The contrast of the heightened world of the supernatural and our heroes being essentially exterminators with PhDs was an incredible engine for novelty and for comedy. As the creative side was being handled, so too did the business side need fostering. The film ended up commanding a handsome budget between $25 to $30 million depending on your source. So handsome that it was record-breaking, like Richard Gere when he won his second title for Sexiest Man Alive. But truly, at the time, no comedy had commanded so high a budget. And hilariously, that number was totally fudged. According to Reitman, he was asked how much money he needed for the film, and was basically like, I don't know, 25 mil? And Columbia Pictures then president Frank Price was like, sweet. It turns out Reitman basically tripled the budget for his previous film Stripes and figured that sounded, quote, reasonable. What a king. I had a boss who always used to say, in showbiz, you don't get what you ask for, you get what you negotiate. Turns out, not if you're Ivan Reitman. With their dream budget almost magically secured, the creative trio of Aykroyd, Ramis, and Reitman sequestered themselves to shoot the script, heading off to Martha's Vineyard for what amounted to a 2-week sprint to churn out a final product capable of getting into production. While stressful, as one would rightly imagine, it was also, according to Reitman, 2 of the greatest weeks of my life. We worked 7 days a week, had wonderful meals with our family, and then went back to work at night. Here, the first order of business was to differentiate the characters, who in early drafts were fairly thin and similar. They eventually found the fluidly effective dynamic of the main trio of Venkman, Stantz, and Spengler by building them off the archetypes of another beloved Hollywood trio, that of the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. The group flirted with the idea of the 3 of them having a boss, directing them into various supernatural situations, but Ramis vetoed that idea, smartly preferring the Ghostbusters to be in control of their own destiny. Writers, remember that. Active protagonist. Good. You want your heroes to be the one making choices to advance the plot. Only you can prevent passive protagonist syndrome. More generally, the largest challenge of the story, according to Reitman, was determining the story's goal, villain, and just how the mammoth Marshmallow Man would end up appearing on the streets of New York in the 3rd act. In fact, earlier drafts have that bloated alabaster emblem of the Stay Puft organization being just one of a legion of ghouls and ghosties manifesting itself in New York City. Apparently, one version saw him rising from the East River while still in the first act of the film. This was eventually, and also smartly, changed in order to maintain the film's earthly realism as long as possible. And after 2 weeks of all this, they had completed the screenplay, a shooting draft, as we said in the biz, which meant it was time for the cameras to start rolling. In total, the script was, wait, what am I doing? That's the next section. You've heard me say it before, and now you're hearing me say it again. Hollywood is a town that loves rules. But when it all comes down to it, there are no rules. If you make something that rules. Having said that, comedy is a beast with many domains, and each one of those domains does come with its own formal principles. Not rules per se.
It's more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
Meant to make it work within its format. You've got half-hour single-cam sitcoms, half-hour multi-cam sitcoms, short satirical articles, feature writing, advertising copy, monologue writing, stand-up storytelling, pure joke writing, sketch writing,
shrimp stew, shrimp salad,
and more. For example, when writing a multi-cam script, the convention there, one of the principles, is to write stage directions that sound like they're yelling at the reader.
Wilford, I'm Leonard.
Chuck Lorre, who hurt you? And feature writing, given its length and thus its higher degree of difficulty, is even more prone to having all these so-called rules and principles. As I'm also wont to say, screenwriting is an impossible task that we try to fuck up as little as we can. So it's only natural that writers would want guardrails to avoid such upfuckery. And that's what makes Ghostbusters so interesting to me, because it throws so many of the traditional feature writing principles out the window, especially for its first 2 acts, and instead focuses on funny first, filling its early pages with scenes that are tantamount to sketches, with only the thinnest of plot threads being advanced during interstitial scenes. What I'm saying is, Ghostbusters is a film with really great writing, but it's not written like a well-written film. Now, before you start going full Protonic reversal on me, let me explain. The characters here are thin as hell, simple, understandable, hilarious, to be sure, as they're all built around strong comedic engines, but ultimately, thin as hell. They start out exactly as they end. The closest thing you have to a character arc is Bill Murray basically just getting a date with Sigourney Weaver. The only emotion anyone feels beyond like ghost panic is horniness. The characters undergo no struggle, no real struggle. They get kicked out of their lab, sure, which is a necessary structural element. The film at least hits its structural hallmarks in that regard. But in literal moments, they have secured a loan, bought a building, started their business, and gotten a series of successful calls. Not exactly what I'd call struggle. The film is pretty much just plot points held up by some of the sturdiest comedic scenes imaginable. In fact, Harold Ramis in the commentary says something that encapsulates the film perfectly. I think one of the nicest reviews we got for this movie said the whole film was like a perfectly told joke. And that is, frankly, the best way to think of the structure of the film. Like a good joke, it's basically the setup and the punchline. Here, 2 acts of setup and then a 3rd act that is that punchline. So how, as writers and filmmakers, do you keep an audience invested when you aren't using any of the typical narrative feature-length tricks? You write the whole thing like a sketch. It's a move that really shouldn't work. And as pure, true, by-the-book sketch comedy, it really probably wouldn't. But in the deft hands of these masters who had all honed their sketch writing skills at comedy institutions like SNL and SCTV, the principles of sketch comedy were brought into almost every scene, keeping us laughing, introducing and building on and paying off comedic concepts from scene to scene in ways that leave us dying for the next. Interspersed with great comedic performances and some all-time dialogue coming from Bill Murray and co., it keeps us as audience members on the hook. But how did they do this? What are the principles of sketch? Well, hold on to your ectoplasm, people, because we're about to dig in. Sketch, as an art form, has been around for quite some time. But in the modern era of comedy, its principles were most famously codified by the Upright Citizens Brigade, or UCB, the sketch and improv comedy juggernaut founded by Amy Poehler, Matt Walsh, Matt Besser, and Ian Roberts. Many budding comic writers and performers, myself included, have enrolled in their sketch writing and improv classes over the years. In these classes, which cost a pretty penny, they give away their secrets. So what, according to the greats, actually makes up a sketch? In a nutshell, sketches are short comedic vignettes that are built around a game. A comedic engine that is defined by one unusual thing that exists in an otherwise recognizable world. That game heightens with a series of ever bigger beats that follow the principle of if this, then what? culminating in a climax at either the highest point or a satisfying callback. And to be fair, what I've described is primarily the UCB school of thinking in regards to sketches. There are other comedy schools like the Groundlings who do things slightly differently, but I did my time at UCB, as did many SNL alumni like those who wrote the film, so that's the lens we're going to use today. Now, let's distill that formulation of sketch down a little bit to see how it applies to Ghostbusters. The primary elements of sketches are the game, essentially the premise, and the series of beats that heighten that game. Basically, funny moments that keep ratcheting up until you get a laugh that you can't top. And then you get out. One unspoken consequence of this is that characters are, at best, thin. They get names like Sad Friend, or Angry Dad, or Gay Zombie. There are no arcs to be had. There's not room. The characters are pretty much just outcroppings of the game itself, all part of the comedic engine of the scene. All of which sounds a lot like Ghostbusters.
It's true.
Now, with these sketch writing principles at hand, let's take a little guided tour on some of the incredible early scenes of Ghostbusters to show you just how sketchy they really are. For each one, I'll point out the game, basically what the title of that sketch would be, flag the first unusual thing, and point out the heightening beats along the way. This opening scene with Bill Murray is basically a sketch. We start off here really quickly. Title will say,
Tell me what you think it is.
Researcher is a relentless flirt. We have this base reality where we're doing a scientific test for ESP, and the first unusual thing here, what would be out of the norm even for an ESP test, is that Venkman is very clearly lying to this woman, saying that she always gets correct answers as a way of flirting with her.
Incredible. That's 5 for 5. You can't see these, can you?
As we go, we heighten. She gets more and more answers right, even when she's wrong. Her cohort gets more answers wrong, even when he's right, all of which leads to him getting electric shocked every time. The blow here at the end of the scene comes when Stantz barges in and Venkman sets up his follow-up session with the woman, who knows exactly what time this will be.
You are a legitimate phenomenon.
Talk about ESP. Also, fun fact from the director's commentary, this whole scene was inspired by the famous Milgram experiment, which looked at how participants would dole out electric shocks when authority figures told them to. Only here we put Bill Murray in the role and tried to see if we could get the audience to like a protagonist even when he is basically torturing someone from the first time we see him.
Maybe my theory is correct.
This sketchy sequence is driven purely on character, practically a speed run of how can we make this guy the most harmlessly annoying neighbor possible.
I taped 20-minute workout on my machine and played it back at high speed, so it only took 10 minutes. I got a great workout. Good.
For the game, call it Neighbor Can't Take a Hint. And the beats heighten from clearly lying about thinking it was his drugstore delivery, using that delivery to make himself sound like a cool exercise guy, inviting the Dana Barrett character in, following her to her door, and telling a shaggy dog story that pretty much glosses over how he tried to Spider-Man his way into her apartment to shut off her TV. Then white knighting her by saying he then turned up his own TV to drown out the noise complaint from hers. It all ends with this incredible blow too, a callback to his mention that neighbors should have each other's keys by locking himself out of his own apartment. This poor sod can't even keep track of his own keys. Who better then to be our otherworldly keymaster? This next sequence we have when Venkman goes to Weaver's. For sketch title, say, Ghost Hunter is a relentless flirt. The base reality is just this ghost hunter inspecting an apartment, but the first unusual thing happens right away. He starts doing weird stuff that's very clearly flirting. First, he basically attacks the closet when he opens it. He then twinkles these piano keys, something that he apparently improv'd and is one of the funnier moments of the scene. He's basically thinks he's torturing the ghost by doing that on the piano.
I hate this. I like to torture him.
Then he has a lot of great, basically, one-liners where he asks, oh, a lot of space? Do you live here alone? He asks if anything ever happens in the bedroom, and she says no, and he says, what a crime. It keeps building to its eventual climax where Venkman says fuck it and confesses his love to her, saying that he'll earn her love back by busting her ghost.
I've got it.
No.
I'll prove myself to you.
It's not necessary.
Again, if we're going to call the game here something along the lines of Ghost Hunter is a relentless flirt, then this about delivers on all levels. This whole short montage is basically a mini sketch with the game of what if exterminators were firefighters. This whole sequence of them in the hotel hallways also feels very sketch to me. Maybe the sketchiest element to this whole section is the hilarious hotel manager at the end, who keeps having to tell guests that everything is okay inside the banquet hall as the sounds inside get crazier and crazier. In fact, this is another element that wasn't even in the shooting script, meaning that they found this along the way, which really does contribute to its sketch sensibility, as it's such a modular thing. You can just take it and place it in there wholesale without having to do any other work. It's just comedy. This entire fun and game section is also pretty sketch-like. It's basically a direct mapping of a classic getting famous montage, something that relies on our awareness of the tropes and then finds ways to subvert them. For a sketch title, say, Exterminators Get Too Famous. And in terms of heightening and ending on the biggest note, it's hard to get bigger than Dan Aykroyd getting sloppy toppy from the great beyond. Another term for the final comedic beat of a scene is the blow. This is maybe the most literal you could ever take that. Lastly, this is one of my favorite sequences in the whole movie. We'll call this Guy Thinks Demonic Possession is Kinky Roleplay. And it's the sequence that really sold me on the film's sketchy sensibility. For the game here, that's what I just said. Guy thinks demonic possession is kinky roleplay. The base reality. Man comes over for what he thinks is a date. First unusual thing. This woman's behavior is clearly demonic. I don't need to really spell it out for you. Everything about her screams, there's something up here.
There is no Dana. There is only Zoo.
And from here, pretty much every beat is laugh out loud funny. In no small part because you have an acting great in Weaver going up against a comedy all-timer in Murray. First of all, the way Venkman just says, hello, hello. No human has ever said it like that. It got funnier every time I watched it for this video. Not even an actual beat, it's just hilarious.
Hello?
She answers the door, asks, are you the keymaster? He says no, she slams the door. He tries to peek through the wrong side of the people. Immediately, knock knock again. You're the keymaster? Of course! And he comes on in. From there, it's just beat after beat. The extremely flat delivery of him saying, are we still going out? Gozer asking, do you want this body? And Venkman saying, is this a trick question? When Demon Dana says, take me now, Bill Murray's like, you know, we never really talk anymore. She throws him on the bed. I make it a rule never to get involved with possessed people. It's more like a guideline, actually, when she pushes back on it.
It's more what you'd call guidelines.
Sounds like you got at least 2 people in there. Might be a little crowded. It's just, I love this so much. And as is the case with Murray, it's impossible to really tell when he's being sincere. How much he's playing along with things versus totally fucking around. This always risks taking the audience out of the experience, getting in the way of our suspension of disbelief. But as is also the case with Murray, it's just so damn funny when he does it. And the sketch portion of this sequence more or less ends once he tries to communicate with the real Dana that's hiding inside there somewhere. That's where we truly break out of the form.
There is no Dana. There is only Zoo.
And it's smart here that they marry the sketch element to more traditional feature film form, by having him realize what's going on. Another important element of comedy, and really characterization in general, is playing to the top of a character's intelligence.
Do you want some coffee, Mr. Tully?
Do I?
Yes, have some.
Yes, have some.
Turning it into a scene that will actually advance the plot was a good move. Also, for all his sleazebaggy nature, a great face turn by Peter Venkman here, being a mid-80s consent king. Fellas, if she's inhabited by a scion of Zool, just say no. From here, it seems to me that once the third act hits and things get serious, these sketchy elements fall by the wayside, as they have to service the plot and move things along in order for, it to actually be a movie, for it to actually come to a climax. But by this time, these scenes have all done their jobs. They've been hilarious, memorable, characterizing bits of writing that, in toto, coalesce into a simple but strong foundation for that third act. And at that point, the plot becomes the central focus. Again, more so than any of the characters in real character arc-y ways. But because you do have to pay off the promise of the premise in your movie. Here, in this film about ghost busting, you're practically committing fraud if your climax isn't the busting of the biggest possible ghost. The script itself takes one final cue from the sketch world, which is ending on the highest note. Typically, the denouement of a film, essentially the post-climax wrap-up, can be anywhere from like 5 to 15 minutes long as we tie everything together. But, like a good joke, as Ramis puts it, or like a quality sketch as I'm putting it, you want to go out on the laugh. And the script manages about as close to that as reasonably possible, as there's literally just over 2 pages, think 2 screen minutes by design, 4 minutes in the actual film, between the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man getting nuked and those 80s credits rolling. Beyond the film's sketchy sensibilities, there are a ton of other great elements of comedic writing that go into this movie, even if
classic narrative structure
isn't the primary focus of the film. So here I'd like to touch a little on some of the other great writing moves that keeps Ghostbusters bussin'. I'm so sorry. Number 1, there's no attempt to explain the ghosts in this film. I love that about this movie. As a writer, when you're establishing a world such as this, one of the primary questions you'll ask yourself is how much you want to explain. But one of the more general principles of screenwriting, of narrative in general, that applies here, is that of one big lie. At the beginning of your project, you're able to get away with one big lie. In essence, the lie is essentially your premise. It's what your project is. One great modern example of this is The Leftovers. If you haven't seen that masterpiece yet, turn this off. Better yet, just turn down the volume and play me on a loop. Like and subscribe, by the way, and go watch that, The Leftovers, from beginning to end. And bring the tissues. Man, it's 3 seasons and I think I sobbed at every episode. The finale was just like 90 minutes of me heaving tears. The Leftovers is built around its big lie of the sudden departure, the sudden and unexplained disappearance of 2% of the population. And it's not a spoiler to say that, by the end of the series, you never learn why. Because that's not the point. The show is, frankly, not interested in what happened, or what caused the sudden departure. What the show says is, okay, this happened. So how do we deal with that? And in the course of answering that question, it cranks out 3 seasons of some of the most amazing television of all time. Of course, if you just dropped the sudden departure into the 5th episode of Breaking Bad and similarly don't explain a thing, that would never work. Jesus. You have to do it at the beginning. It has to be your one big lie. All of which is to say, the big lie of Ghostbusters is already there from the title. This is a world with ghosts. There's no time spent explaining it. For one thing, there are laughs to be had, and those explanations would get in the way. To say nothing of the fact that once you offer an explanation for the impossible, you kind of start an endless loop of dissatisfaction, as those who aren't satisfied by the explanation start to poke holes and have conversations that are niggling and needless and unrelated to anything material in the film in the manner that only super fans of things are ever able to care about or pull off.
Worst movie ever!
You can be certain that conversations, at some point, were had between Aykroyd and Ramis and Reitman about how much they should explain. And God bless them for choosing the boldest answer. Not a damn thing. 2. The low status take on the Ghostbusters. In hindsight, it's easy to overlook all the things that a film like Ghostbusters could have been. They could have been Hollywood handsome hunks. They could have had the fanciest gear that money could buy. They could be based in Los Angeles or abroad, as opposed to the then very murderific New York City. Our heroes could have been, heroic. In other words, they could have been high status. But one of the defining creative choices of Ghostbusters was to not make its heroes heroic, to turn away from that first thought idea of making them highfalutin, and instead position them as blue-collar everymen, regular Joes trying to start a small business in a Reaganite economy, to make them low status. I mentioned elsewhere on this channel the important but overlooked element of status in comedy and in storytelling. Status is one of the key pieces of information we have in terms of how characters' behavior, and our perception of that behavior, is formed. Put most simply, a man in a suit trying to pry open a car door must have locked his keys inside, while a man in rags must be trying to steal that car. You prejudiced bastard. In this film, the low status of the Ghostbusters not only gets us on their side, as we can't help but root for the underdog, but it also informs and drives much of the plot. We first meet the Busters in their rinky-dink low-status lab. They then get kicked out of that lab, meaning that they weren't even good enough for it. Talk about low status. Moments later, they launch their ghost-busting venture. But how is that positioned to the audience in the world? Not as upwardly mobile upstarts, that's for sure. Our Ghostbusters are glorified exterminators, and maybe even not glorified, whose pests are those pesky ghosts. They're blue-collar workers who have formed a co-op. What could be further from this literally out-of-this-world concept of the paranormal? To tie it back to sketch comedy, this is a concept that I've already name-checked once or twice called mapping. Essentially laying the specifics of one thing on top of the specifics of another thing.
That's what she said!
A lot of great comedy can come from mapping. A super simple example, a candy salesman acting like a drug dealer. In this case, the specifics of the behavior of a drug dealer are mapped onto the specifics of selling candy, like offering kids their first taste for free or having a meeting in a shady alley to sell them some high-concentration cocoa. Another great example, SNL's HBO's Mario Kart, which is a commercial parody where the specifics of classic, gritty HBO fare are mapped onto the lighthearted specifics of Mario Kart. So, in our film here, the Ghostbusters are basically mapped onto pest control. The gulf between those two things create a tension, and that tension is to be one of the chief comedic drivers of the film. I mean, think about it. This is a supernatural story about workmen and permits. The greatest antagonist for 90% of the film is not even a ghost. It's a dude who works for the government and is trying to enforce, a statute. And that alone, even in a vacuum, is hilarious. A ghost movie where the bad guys are bylaws? Come on, a film like that can't help but stand out. It's different. You haven't seen something like this before. And as the biomechanical meatbags that we are, we live for that shit. Because that novelty gets our brains to shoot out dopamine like it's the 4th of neurochemical July. Number 3, the ghosts pose no real threat to anyone. A small point, but a critical one. From beginning to end, there's not one capital G ghost that causes any sort of problem to society other than general menace. Some ectoplasmic goop here, a farty malodorous waft there, sure, but the only true threat to our heroes and the world comes from Gozer, not a ghost, but a self-avowed god of destruction. From a writing perspective, this is smart, as it lends itself towards the silliness that this movie wants to live in, and that it nails so well, in particular in regards to Bill Murray's Venkman character. His glib, ironic detachment would not play so well, would not be so hilariously endearing if it was amidst actual horrible things happening. If these ghosts were wreaking havoc and suffering amongst the NYC populace, the Peter Venkman mess-around jives might be taken a little less, well, chilly.
You're going to endanger our client, the nice lady who paid us in advance before she became a dog.
The tone of Ghostbusters in general would be wildly different if there were greater threats at play, so it was a very good move to save the actual world-ending stakes for the appearance of the god of destruction in the third act, and not for Slimer farting up the 12th floor of some 5-star hotel. Number 4, grounding Venkman with the B story. As a character, on his own, Venkman is vexing. He's operating in this well-worn groove of the glib cynic, the ironically detached cast member who's less a part of the ongoing action than commenting on it as it happens. And as I've commented now on more than a few videos, bringing in this level of self-awareness is a riskier maneuver than it can seem. For that level of self-awareness and meta-commentary requires the ability for the piece to rise above the things that it is self-aware of, the things that it's commenting on. Otherwise, it's basically going, haha, did you see that? I did that. Which at best is inert and at worst is deeply off-putting in the way that only bad comedy can be. I've been harping on this topic since my first video, my dissection of Scream. In that film, a vastly different spin on comedy and horror, having the killer be aware of the tropes of slasher films forces him, and thus the author who is writing him, to transcend those tropes. If he's aware of them, and so is the audience, then he'll have to develop his own roadmap, try new things, subvert the tropes and our expectations of them in ways that are novel and thrilling. Otherwise, you'd basically have Ghostface popping out after a character says, "I'll be right back," killing them, then jimming the camera being like, "I killed him because he said that." This is the risk that Venkman runs throughout the film. He is so detached from the world, the things that he should ostensibly care about and that his partners very clearly do care about, that he risks feeling like not a character at all, just a walking, talking joke machine meant for the writers to have their silly cake and eat it too. So why does Venkman work so well in the film? Well, I have an answer, but first, there's a caveat. It's because of Bill Murray. Bill Murray is a rare bird, a one-of-one man so compellingly hilarious that he basically breaks the rules whenever you bring him around, because he really is so uniquely funny that he'll bring enough laughs to justify pretty much anything he could ever do or say. And somehow this also seems to apply to him in real life as much as it does in movies. But beyond Murray's irrepressible comedic bounce, Venkman ends up working because the writers very smartly do manage to humanize him, to pull in the character vital elements of stakes and motivation by making him and his
love
interest the primary focus of the B story. The B story, technically speaking, is a secondary narrative thread, in fact very often a romance, that occurs in parallel to the events of the main story of the film, often in ways that both inform it from a plot perspective and affect it thematically. The relationship between Neo and Trinity, for example, is the B story of The Matrix, a deeply important part of the overall film, but one that is technically in the backseat relative to the story of Neo's awakening as the One and humanity's fight against the machines. Here, in a much more restrainedly, though still fantastical setting, the B story is the, again,
romance
between Venkman and Dana. And it's through this that Venkman establishes his motivation. It's only in this scene, when Venkman checks out Dana's apartment for the first time, that we start to root for him in the story, because he sees that Dana is spurning his advances, no matter how charmingly weird, and he gets it in his head that the best way for him to win her over is to figure out her supernatural issue once and for all. And that's kind of it. It's almost shockingly simple. I mean, to even call it a romance, as I've been air quoting, is a bit of a stretch. It's basically just a series of scenes where Bill Murray flirts with her, and then they kiss at the end. Certainly not the least problematic romance of the era, but quite definitely a sign of the strange times. But the elegance here is found in its simplicity. After all this time, a half hour into the movie, Venkman finally has something he gives a shit about. And with that, he really enters the narrative flow of the film, still dropping hilarious one-liners as he unavoidably does, but while taking part in the action and actually having an interest in saving the city. It's great. It's important to note too that this move, Venkman taking it upon himself to prove it to Dana, was also not even in the shooting script, meaning that even as the camera started rolling, this pivotal element of the film wasn't there yet. The original scene actually just has a Venkman who reads a little bit creepier on the page, more trying to hook up with Dana than earnestly confess his feelings and start what would become a meaningful, we hope, relationship. Yeah, a smart change. And number 5, a simple mythology. To wrap this section up, I'd like to shine a transprotonic light on how the smart choice of creating such a simple mythology for Zuul in the film works. Similar to the conventions I mentioned earlier around the film's one big lie around the existence of ghosts, conversations were undoubtedly had, but how much they really had to explain about the mythology of their big bad, Zuul. And their answer, again rather smartly, was almost nothing. Other films would get lost in tracing the origins of this great ancient evil. Some of the most boring scenes, necessary in many ways but not sufficiently compelling in modern horror, are when the backstory of the great evil is explained. Bonus points if that explanation comes from a visiting priest.
This is overpowering.
It's getting worse.
Yes, it certainly doesn't like that I'm here, and I cannot help you.
And triple bonus points if that priest ends up succumbing to the evil themselves by the end. At this point, it's formulaic.
Awful.
It works well enough, especially in the modern mold of Blumhouse films, but it's also just boring and expected. But Ghostbusters zags on this, essentially hitting us with the following. I heard the name Zuul. Damn, let me look that up. Oh shit, he was a god of destruction. All done. There you go, so easy a caveman could understand it. One doesn't need to have Father Doom and Gloom over to the house for tea to know that God of Destruction equals bad. Now, there's still some needlessly on the nose and technically clunky stuff at the very end, the choose the form of the destructor bit, but that's pretty easily forgivable since it results in the all-time great appearance of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. The only other mythological beat that requires any sort of story explanation too is with the possession of Dana and Lewis as the Keymaster and Gatekeeper. Again, the less is more philosophy is applied here, and its one-note simplicity is actually used quite interestingly to make a joke out of the whole thing as it progresses, and it works. Basically, you don't really need to know anything about who a Keymaster is or what a Gatekeeper does. We know just through sheer understanding of the English language that keys unlock things, and gates are things that are locked. If there was any doubt in our minds, fret not, because after getting possessed, pretty much the only thing that either character says is, I am the Keymaster. Are you the Gatekeeper? I am the Gatekeeper. Where is the Keymaster?
Are you the Keymaster?
Are you the gatekeeper?
And God bless the comedy form, because this is something that you can get away with in a comedy, but really couldn't elsewhere. It would just be too silly. But here, tonally, it fully fits in with the world that has been established. Even better, they really hammer the idea home, with the amount of times each character says their I'm this, where's that line, reaching that so overdone it's funny point, and still laying it on from there.
Are you the gatekeeper?
By hanging a lantern on this simple-minded repetition by calling it out, they get to have their cake and eat it too, making sure that the audience never has any questions about what's going on, while also using that same device for really fun laughs. And 6, one of the great fun and games sections. In screenwriting circles, the very beginning of the second act is often referred to as the fun and games section. At least, it is called this in the Save the Cat structure, meaning it's pretty much de facto called that across the board. The hold that Save the Cat has on this town is bogglingly monopolistic to the point of being problematic, but that's a conversation for a different time. Not that I haven't used it to death myself, and it's not like a valuable tool, but just like a lot of these rules, it ends up being more something you can apply when looking analytically back on an existing thing than something that is truly helpful when, making a thing, generating a thing. And like anything prescriptive, it can kind of just end up locking you into a box when the whole point of creative endeavors is to get out of the box. And didn't you say this was a conversation for a different time? Sorry. The fun and games section here amounts to the delightful montage of the Ghostbusters' growing fame. I hit it a bit in the sketch section because this is basically just an opportunity for pure comedy, mapping the rise of more traditional stars onto that of ghostly exterminators. I won't belabor too much here, other than I just wanted to explicitly call it out while naming what it's traditionally called. This is one of the great fun and games sections. There's a well-worn adage that explaining comedy is a lot like dissecting a frog. You may learn something, but you just end up killing the frog. But that only counts if the frog exists. In this section, I'm going to take us into the shooting script for the Ghostbusters and take a look at some of the comedy writing that didn't make the cut, some of the scripted tidbits that didn't end up in the final film. maybe we can learn something along the way. Librarian in script is listed in her mid-20s, not as an old woman. There's no ectoplasmic goop in the script. There's no haggling for the firehouse with the real estate agent. There's a much longer infomercial in the commercial, much more involved, would have eaten up a ton more budget, wouldn't have been as funny as the final product. There's no mention of Stay Puft marshmallows on the counter in the script. Spengler popping out from under the desk wasn't in the script and must have been something they found when they were like blocking out the scene. Murray jumping over the banister was in improv, and if you listen closely you can literally hear his feet scuffing the wood, meaning that he was just a hair away from eating total shit and maybe even murking Sigourney Weaver in the process. Weaver improvised the line game show host about Bill Murray. In the script it was used car salesman. Already touched on this, but this scene did not end with Murray resolving to prove his worth to Barrett by solving her supernatural crisis, maybe the most necessary change of the bunch. There's an expanded sequence introducing us to the havoc that Slimer wreaks before the Ghostbusters get Who You Gonna Called. There's no in the elevator moment of them turning on the proton pack for the first time and cautiously shuffling to one side. Bill Murray's "we thought you were someone else" line after shooting at the poor maid wasn't there. There wasn't even a joke at all, they just moved right along. There's a slightly different explanation of what happens when you cross the streams. Spengler calls what we know today as proton packs particle throwers. There's a post-hotel press conference, which is massively cut in the final product to lead directly into the fun and games montage. This talk show bit was a little longer, featuring a call out of some of the old comedy duos who made similar ghostly movies or specials. Smart cut, as it really does nothing but age the film and take us out of this movie's particular universe. Script had a cut to the tragically bleak containment facility for all the souls that they had ripped up and packaged away. Another smart cut, that's depressing. They cut a scene where two bums ask what kind of breed the terror dogs are as Tully goes running by. There's a third act scene where Stantz gets head from a ghost in an abandoned police station. Here, in the final cut, this was rejiggered and added to the fun and games montage. There is an extended shit going bad sequence when the EPA releases all their saved of ghosts back into the world. There is no dickless "this man has no dick" joke. God bless Bill Murray, or even a passing mention of cats and dogs living together. There's a different and worse Venkman joke about Dana being a dog after she's transformed. Gozer is written as a hollow-cheeked, distinguished-looking man in his 60s. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man does not explode in a massive burst of marshmallow goo. Instead, they just find a, quote, massive mound of cooling sucrose on the street. And with the aforementioned, Stantz does not get his deadpan hilarious delivery of "we're the Ghostbusters" while covered in marshmallow goop. Oh, what might have been. Not enough can be said about the comedic performances of this film, coming from a series of still young stars who are already wizened pros within the genre. But amidst a lineup of heavy hitters, it is undeniably Bill Murray and his Peter Venkman who reigns supreme. Let's be real. Bill is straight up cooking in this one, giving one of the all-time elite comedy performances. This is his movie, and we are all just stopping by. By this point in his career, he was already known as the Murricane for his on-scenes and behind-the-scenes chaos. We can't overlook the writing's role in this too, to be sure. Murray is performing the effectively written character of Peter Venkman, but it is Murray who turns it into something else, and in a manner that few could have ever done. I mean, let's face it, Bill Murray is a singular character not just in comedy history, but in film history. And at this point, I think an argument could be made, maybe even just history. His indefatigable charisma is present in every scene, every moment, every line, every action. Some of the greatest tidbits of dialogue in this film, lines that have etched themselves into film history, weren't even written for Venkman. They were just Bill Murray coming up with shit, twinkling the keys in Dana's apartment.
I hate this. I like to torture him.
His incredible riff on the emblem of ghost escaping chaos being dogs and cats living together.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
The bonkers way that he says hello when Zool Dana answers the door.
Hello?
And so much more. A close watching of this film really rewards you, as there's so many micro moments where Bill Murray is just doing something out there and hilarious.
Right, good idea.
He's just a comedy dynamo, and one of the chief drivers of this film, one of the most memorable parts about an incredibly memorable movie.
We're here to do something very, very important.
Contrasted against Murray's skeptical Venkman, Dan Aykroyd's Ray Stantz is the unwavering believer. As a performer, he plays on his existing chemistry with Murray and Ramis, but within the film, he's mostly here to spout supernatural gobbledygook.
Total protonic reversal.
Believably, mind you, which is what he's good at, and isn't as easy as you might think, and to spill exposition. Despite this, his earnestness is just so endearing, and his drive to really solve the mystery of the ghosts is a chief driver of the film's plot. Harold Ramis's Egon Spengler is a small character ultimately, but a vital part of the film. He really only has a handful of lines throughout the movie.
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
in keeping with the characterization of his sort of quiet savant character, but almost all of these lines manage to be characterizing and hilarious.
You know, you are a real humanitarian.
I don't think he's human.
Only appearing halfway through the film, and given relatively little page space in which to work, Ernie Hudson's Winston Zeddemore proves a great everyman foil to the paranormal antics of the rest of the Ghostbusters trio. Winston probably would have gotten a lot more lost in the din of the film if he hadn't been introduced with one of the film's more iconic lines. I'll believe anything if there's a steady paycheck in it. This is about as well as you could possibly sum up a character in a single sentence. Just an incredible bit of dialogue, which makes it no surprise that it endures to this day. I do also like how he is given this flash of Christian belief to contrast with the Ghostbusters' paranormal secularism. On a sadder note, poor Hudson had to audition 5 separate times in order to get this role, and he even auditioned under an early version of the script, one that featured his character in a lot larger of a role, with more backstory, playing an Air Force demolitions expert. Thinking this to be the case, the size of his role, and being jazzed about it, he actually agreed to take a pay cut to do it for half of his usual salary. A Hollywood no-no, only to be sent a revised script the night before shooting began, with his role really greatly reduced. Big bummer for Winnie. Still fresh in the cultural consciousness as Ripley in Alien, and thus pigeonholed as a not-comedy person, Weaver famously got down on her hands and knees to bark like a dog in the audition, proving she was pretty much game for anything. Like most of the cast that has gone on to legend status at this point, it's pretty unsurprising that she gives such a stellar performance as Dana Barrett, being note-perfect as her regular self and hilariously fun as her possessed self. It's always a delight when you get to see acting talent cross domains like that, whether it's comedians turning in a great dramatic performance or dramatic actors showing off surprising comedic chops. Weaver does just that here, making the most out of a role that could definitely be forgettable in lesser hands, and by doing so really elevating the film along the way. Originally a role written for his endomorphic opposite, John Candy, Rick Moranis brings a bee-like buzz to his twerpy take on the Louis Tully character, turning in a performance that, pound for pound, almost rivals that of Murray. Only an hour passed between Moranis being sent the script and his accepting the role. Candy, for his part, reportedly didn't truly get the role, suggesting bringing like a German accent and German shepherds to the role. The producers, hilariously, are quoted as saying there were already enough dogs in the film. But the role went to Moranis, and thank God for that. There's not a moment where Moranis is on screen that there isn't something to laugh about, whether in his dialogue, his delivery, his outfits, or just his general affectation. Even the silly, stupid runner of him always getting locked out of his apartment every time is hilarious. And holy shit, I literally didn't realize till I was writing this how perfect of a comedic setup this was for him being the keymaster. Tired of getting locked out of your apartment? Be the key-bearing totem of a malevolent god. I love him even more now. Like Weaver, he nails his transition from regular to possessed, turning on a dime into an airheaded, extra-dimensional version of himself, and he brings it all home with his final scene, where, after Zool's defeat, he just immediately returns to his just-the-worst accountant persona and asks who does the financials for the Ghostbusters. Also, shout out to Slavica Jovan as Gozer. What the fuck? This wasn't Sigourney Weaver after being put through like a David Bowie machine? I 100% thought that going into the movie, even after watching the movie. I just thought this was Sigourney Weaver in like really done up makeup. Like I fully thought this was just the next stage in her natural progression from Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard of like normal, possessed, awakened Gozer. A special shout out here to Slimer, the one ghost that really transcended the film. Multiple sources mention that, especially after his passing, the key inspiration for this nasty ghost was the beloved John Belushi. In the script, Slimer is written much more yellow and vaporous and stanky than in the final version, and is hilariously described as looking like a misshapen potato with a pushed-in face and spindly arms. Dan Aykroyd always referred to Slimer as basically the ghost of John Belushi. He's just a party guy looking to have a good time, says Reitman. The now famous green gelatinous ghost Slimer was actually even based on John's body, Aykroyd says. I will admit to having an inspiration along those lines. Just goes to show you, comedy people are the best of friends and the worst of friends. Maybe not how I'd want to be remembered, but I also feel like Belushi would probably love that. Comedies are not often well-made films. This is not an insult, it's more just a fact of life. Comedies don't have to be well-made films. Comedies, in their own weird way, transcend the medium of film. They could be shot on a potato, but if you've made people laugh, you've done your job. That's the measure of a successful comedy far more than the craft behind, say, its cinematography or its production design. Heck, there are times when filmmaking craft, at least traditional filmmaking craft, is even at odds with comedy. Anything that reads as fancy or and this is the absolute death knell, pretentious, will step right on any laughs you're trying to induce. There's a reason that many modern comedies are shot like TV shows. Flat lighting, simple back and forth cutting shots over the shoulder, and that's because TV works. More accurately, it's easy and it works. And if something works and is easy, it's pretty hard not to do it. Look no further than the West Hollywood Trader Joe's I keep in business by buying the exact same frozen lunches every week of my entire adult life. But though this is the primary mode of comedic filmmaking, it is certainly not the only one. Edgar Wright, for example, has long carried the modern torch for making incredibly filmically interesting comedies. Tony Zhu and his Every Frame a Painting channel, RIP to one of the greats. Seriously, stop watching this and go watch everything he ever did, I won't be mad. He breaks this down better than maybe anyone else ever might be able to. It's hard, but it can be done. And oh my goodness gracious, does Ghostbusters do it. There is really incredible filmmaking on display here. Craft oozes out of the cells of this film like ectoplasm. As with much of the movie, the first two acts are a bit simpler, but also simply effective, with the crunchy immersiveness of all the practical effects and the occasional notable shot like our first establishing high angle of Dana. But in the third act, Reitman, like the Ghosts of Manhattan, really lets loose, with some fantastically memorable wide shots, and making masterful work with the now seemingly forgotten art of matte painting. The special effects, too, take a step up here, really showing where this film's gobsmacking $30 million in $80s budget went. Remember, at the time of its filming, this was the most expensive comedy ever made, and because it ended up being so well made, it more or less launched the genre of the special effects driven comedy. Of course, now we've come so far with CGI technology that has become the primary modality of special effects, as opposed to the more practical special effects of yore. But the challenge with CGI, even incredible CGI, is the uncanny valley, that nearly impossible to bridge gap between the artificial and the real, that we as humans not only can't help but notice, but can't help but be turned off by in a primal way. These sorts of effects really do hit us in the lizard brain, this something's not right here thing, which, again, for comedy, is a death knell. But that's never the case in Ghostbusters. Even the ghosts, clearly effects in a sense, are also a very clearly tangible thing. Sure, we know that spooky librarian ghost isn't truly in the library, but we also know that this thing existed somewhere in corporeal form, and that can't help but imbue it with a degree of realism that we can't shake. And this is true from our first glimpse of Slimer to the climactic showdown with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. The effects shine here, keeping us invested and keeping us hooked, even though the events of the film itself have gone to crazy town. In fact, to film this final rooftop sequence set atop the building at 55 Central Park West, production had to build one of the largest constructed sets in film history. What appeared to be the rest of Manhattan was in fact a massive 360-degree cyclorama painting, which encircled the entire set. And that set itself was built 3 stories off the ground to provide a sense of depth and to allow the filmmakers to shoot from below. Apparently, the lighting in this sequence alone used so much power that the rest of the studio actually had to shut down, and on top of that, extra generators had to be brought in order to provide the power needed. And a film that's willing to do that is pretty much willing to do anything. And that's a huge reason for why we like Ghostbusters. Also, man, shout out to this sequence where Sigourney Weaver floats in midair after being possessed. That shit just rules. I literally watched this film being like, oh, they put her on the lift. Then all of a sudden she starts rotating in midair, and my mind was blown. It blows your mind. To pull this off, Reitman reportedly rigged a setup that he had learned about from his work with magician Doug Henning, involving a body cast and a mechanical arm hidden in the curtains. And it's a rare day in film that something we know, even as we watch it, is artificial, can really replicate that sense, that feeling of magic. Filmmaking, 10 out of 10. Good job, boys. Like most of the invisible aural elements of the film, good sound being the chief counterpart, the musical direction and scoring of a film are easily overlooked aspects that have incredibly outsized effects on our movie-going experience. The most effective soundtracks are able to mirror the tone of the film, conveying through pitch, rhythm, timbre, and tone the same things that the rest of the film attempts to convey through camera, dialogue, and action. It should hopefully go without saying that this is a difficult task, but Ghostbusters manages to deftly use these elements to heighten the experience, both dramatically and comedically. For starters, the film's theme, Not the iconic title track by Ray Parker, we'll get there, but the film's actual main theme is a perfect tonal match. It's jaunty, it's upbeat, but with enough of those spooky, discordant intervals like the famous tritone to evoke the sort of Halloweeny spookiness that the film lives in. In fact, the film's score uses these sorts of horror conventions in a number of cool ways. One thing that the casual moviegoer may not be acquainted with are the handful of specialized instruments that create some of the sounds we most associate with horror. Chief among those are the hilariously named waterphone, which is used more for ambient tones, and then the more classically instrumental theremin. You know how sometimes, in the course of researching video essays and documentaries, creators happen across something they never expected, forcing them down a wilder rabbit hole than they could have ever dreamed of, completely changing the shape of their project? Well, I didn't do that, but holy shit, I found some cool stuff out about the theremin. To not belabor things in a video that's already wildly stretching the modern content consumer's attention span, the theremin is an insane instrument. It is, dare I say, the only instrument that you don't even have to touch to play. Even watching someone play it seems supernatural. What's really happening is some more brainy physics stuff that basically boils down to the instrument using your body's natural electrochemical capabilities to make some sick-ass weep-wops. And its history alone is insane. This crazy contraption was invented in 1920 by Russian physicist Leon Theremin. Get it? Got popular, but then that popularity fell away as easier to play and more normal electronic instruments were introduced. But like many weird techie specialist things, it ended up finding its own niche with hobbyists. One such hobbyist was Robert Moog, who started building theremins in high school, and then used what he learned to go on to create the Moog Synth, the first commercial synthesizer, which went on to become one of the most vital and widespread instruments of all time. So much so that the instrument playing the main riff of the iconic Ghostbusters theme song is a synthesizer. Something strange. And of course the instrument in the Huey Lewis I Need a New Drug song that song ripped off, but let's put a pin in that. Actually, it's time to talk about that song. The iconic Ghostbusters theme, written and performed by Ray Parker Jr., with one large caveat, is a certified 80s banger. A song so riffly fantastic that it has become as much a part of the film's brand as that No Ghost logo. In fact, it was so successful that, according to a 1989 epistle called Immediate Seating, a look at movie audiences, the song alone added $20 million to the film's gross. Though, I can't seem to find something that backs that up, but if Bruce A. Austin and the 1989 crew at Wadsworth Publishing Company knew what they were talking about, yowza! Wiki says he only took, Ray Parker that is, a few days to produce the track. But in that theatrical distribution promo video I found, it sounds like there's actually an alternate version of that track in there as well. So I'd be surprised if he riffed out that many versions of it so fast, including one that made it to a released, though internal promo video. So a little unsure on the timeline. According to Parker, his inspiration for the track came when he was up late one night and saw a cheap infomercial and realized, oh, that's exactly the sort of thing that the Ghostbusters themselves might have had. So with that in mind, he fashioned something that he felt was like a pseudo-advertising jingle. Of course, Parker went on to be sued by Huey Lewis for plagiarizing Huey's work on the song I Want a New Drug. And if you listen to them both back to back, you kinda get it. Hilariously, the terms of their eventual settlement included an NDA, one that Lewis broke years later in an interview, which then caused Parker to essentially countersue, and complicating all this years later in a 2004 Premiere magazine issue, the filmmakers copped to using Huey Lewis's new drug as temp music in scenes, then giving those scenes to Parker when he was to compose the film's title track, which, well, if nothing else, you can see why things sort of netted out how they did. Sticky real-world issues aside, this theme song is a bop. And when it first hits super early, 2 minutes and 20 seconds in the film, you've got no doubt what you're into. And if you ever listen to it on your own, you can pretty much guarantee that you'll be haunted by its earworm melodies all day long. Also, Chevy Chase and John Candy make a very short appearance in the official music video, which is a fun surprise, so, go check it out. Good for them. Not Chevy Chase, though. That guy's a dick. Ghostbusters made a dent in the pop culture landscape in the moment it was released, and that dent has since grown into a near interdimensional rift, complete with its own gravitational pull. Amidst bated breath from a studio and filmmakers who knew what they were risking with such a highly budgeted comedy, the movie debuted like gangbusters. Or should I say, goes. The film dropped to nearly $14 million in the box office on its opening weekend, outperforming that week's other big horror comedy release, Gremlins. That's right, it's still just so insane that these two iconic supernatural flicks came out on the exact same day. It was also the third weekend that Temple of Doom was in theaters. we used to make things in this country. Ghostbusters ended its smash run as the highest grossing comedy of all time, only to be supplanted by Beverly Hills Cop later that year, only to then retake its throne again with a re-release in the following year, bringing its total cum to almost $240 million, excluding some post-2000 re-releases. Adjusted for inflation, this film took in $667 million in 2020 dollars, making it the 37th highest grossing film of all time. With those sorts of numbers, Ghostbusters of course went on to launch a film series and a general intellectual property franchise that has exceeded over $1 billion in revenue. It spawned 4 sequels or follow-ups, 2 TV series and an upcoming new series via Netflix, 28 video games by SKU, though some were ports or re-releases, a slot machine, a pinball game, comic books, an English language manga, a series of action figures that were only ghosts because Murray refused to license his facial likeness so they couldn't do the Busters, countless toys and collectibles, collectible marshmallows, a novelization, a fiction reference book, and a theme park special effects show at Universal Studios Florida. For all of this, its near invention of the special effects driven comedy, and so much more, the film was added to the Library of Congress in 2015 for preservation in the National Film Registry. Now that's a legacy. So, after all this, why do we like Ghostbusters? Here's a better question. How couldn't we? Ghostbusters is an ooey, gooey mix of everything we know and love, all stirred together in perfect proportion. It's a platonic ribeye of risibility, turning the barest, salt and pepperiest of essentials into a transcendently delicious dish. It's a product of its times that is still, somehow, almost timeless. Even 40 years later, nearly half a century gone from its conception, the writing holds up. The comedy holds up supernaturally, despite comedy's annoyingly milk-like tendency to age. It is, in so many ways, a time capsule, not just of Bill Murray before he got even Bill Murrayer, or Dan Aykroyd before he got almost too Aykroyd, but of a halcyon era of Hollywood that was willing to take the risk on a film like this. If you've been watching this channel, you've likely heard me bitch about the current state of Hollywood, and I still do strongly aver that it's about as bitch-worthy as ever. And because of that, more often than I'd like to admit, I end up feeling like that cynic whose surface you can scratch to reveal a jaded optimist. But for a long time, I was that optimist. Maybe I still am, way down past scratching depth. And films like this can't help but stir something from within that deep place. The one that is fed up with the bullshit, but still believes that we can make these simple, silly, funny things that still somehow feel special, and are in fact all the specialer for it. And if that sounds a bit contradictory, then at the very least, I am operating in the same contradictory lane of Ghostbusters. Here was a hilariously written movie that still seemed to break movies' firmest writing rules. Here was a comedy that dared to be filmically interesting, not to its detriment, as can often happen, but to its immense benefit. Here was the story of blue-collar businessmen bumping up against bureaucracy, of earthly exterminators taking on otherworldly pests, of real-life jokesters who turned a litany of laughs into a lasting legacy. And, in the end, much as the Ghostbusters had to choose the form of their destructor, for this past month or so, I have been able to choose the form of my joyful enabler. There, Ray Stantz couldn't help but picture a beloved emblem of childhood joy. Today, with Ghostbusters, I was lucky enough to be able to do the same. And please, for the love of God, when I die, don't memorialize me as some fat farty ghost. Make me one of those cool ghosts who like haunts bad guys or sucks.